Welcome back. Now, it's that portion of the show where we take you into the august House of Parliament and let you know what exactly has been transpiring this week. Now, from the minority side donning black through to the conversation on that controversial public universities bill, and then the passage of the Creative Arts and anti-money laundering laws. Parliament has been very busy this week. Today, we'll discuss all these issues with our parliamentary correspondent, Joseph Opoku-Gakpo. Joseph, if you can hear me now, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. Right. So just to, situate the conversation, the minority side, at least minority for now, and per what we know, Techiman South might, determine what would happen in future in Parliament, but they donned black as they went to Parliament in the course of the week, bemoaning some of the things that have happened in our country, including what they call the death of democracy. And we'll be delving into some of those issues with our parliamentary correspondent. There are also very interesting tidbits to do with the anti-money laundering bill, which has been passed, and we're going to be delving into that as well. Some interesting details there because these actually affect even our sourcing of financial resources on the international market. So let's just take a sneak peek at what happened in Parliament on Monday, and after that we shall connect with Joseph.
After the fiercely contested presidential and parliamentary elections, parliamentarians returned to the chamber. The minority, clad in traditional mourning clothes, say their choice of black and red is meant to protest what they describe as irregularities in the just-ended elections and also to mourn the people who died during the elections.
We are mourning the death of democracy in our country, the discredited election that the Electoral Commission has conducted, a confused Electoral Commission, discredited Electoral Commission, clearly in cahoots with our opponents to rig the elections and to put out numbers that don't add up. That is what we are mourning. We are also mourning the use of violence in our election, the militarization of elections in this country. We are mourning the killing of 6 unarmed civilians who were only seeking to protect their votes. We are mourning the wanton abuse of state power to arm twist, force electoral officers to declare results in the favor of the ruling government.
Minority Leader Haruna Idrisi insisted the NDC will not recognize results of the 2020 elections declared by the EC because it's fraught with errors. The Electoral Commission has declared that the NPP has 137 seats and NDC 136 seats with one independent candidate. The results of the Sene West constituency is still pending. The NDC is claiming they have the majority in Parliament.
We have 138 already. Techiman South belongs to us. Sene West belongs to us. We have won convincingly. Check the presidential result, over 6,000. And we've put out the margin of victory for the parliamentary. More than 1,000 votes. More than 1,000 human beings. We have won a majority, and that majority will not be stolen. Enough of using weapons, misusing the military to overturn results.
At least 112 out of the 275 parliamentarians will not return to the next parliament. Some retired and many others were defeated in the elections. From Parliament, Joseph Opoku-Gakpo, Joy News.
And that's the man I'm going to be interacting with shortly, reporting there from Parliament on Monday. But let's cross over now. I spoke a bit about the Techiman South incident. Now, both parties, the NDC and the MPP, were sitting on pins and needles as the collation took place. Let's just catch some of those scenes from Parliament when the process was ongoing. Right, so let's cross over now to Joseph, who joins us. Joseph, a very good morning to you.
Ben, good morning. How are you doing?
Well, you've been playing some hide and seek with us this morning. It's good to finally have you.
And it's good to see you too. You know, it's always lovely to be on your show. So Good to see you.
Right.
Good morning again.
Now, so let's gauge the mood. Like I was saying earlier, when the collation process was going on in Techiman South, or is it Sene West? I should say Sene West. And all the scenes that were going on there, you can see in your shot, the General Secretary of the NDC. What was the mood like in Parliament at the time?
So just around that time, I had the opportunity to engage some members of Parliament, including
a bit of a problem there with the feed, and that is technology for you, just when it was getting very interesting. But Joseph will try to reconnect with him as and when the feed is better for him to, tell us what exactly the mood was like. But let's pick some reactions on the back of the declaration of the Sene West seat for the NDC.
Well, I think a little justice has been done in that part of the country. We believe when you go to Techiman and others, it should have been a foregone conclusion that the NDC has got majority in Parliament. The government is determined to use force and other unauthorized methods to ensure that this becomes something which gives them the opportunity to claim that with the addition of the independent candidate, which the president clearly said, I cannot work with you. The president openly said, I cannot work with you. Since when did the president change his mind to say he can work with him? So we believe we've got a majority if they declare Techiman and others.
So for you, there's a sign of more seats that are likely to go to you, the NDC. The difference is that this seat was actually never declared. After a lot of dragged court processes, then eventually was then declared as an NDC one. Your point is that it's a sign of more seats that are likely to fall to the NDC? Without
a doubt. The NPP knew Techiman is a seat that the NDC has won. They've done enough to convince our colleague, who they threw out of Parliament in a very unparliamentary manner. They just basically kicked the guy out, which is never done before. But now he says he'll join their side, which means that if the results stand as it is now, the majority would be 138 in favor of the NPP. No, because we believe Techiman is our seat, which is so far taken away from us. Do you get the sense that something that can be resolved before January 7? I suspect government to use every possible means to drag that case, using the court system even possible, to make sure that the determination of that is never done until the 7th, which gives them the opportunity to attempt to install a speaker. Everybody knows that is their game plan, and that is what they are going to do. But the question I ask again is, since when did the president realize he can work with the former MP? Because he declared, I cannot work with you. He's the same person. So this is politics without principles. That is a sad thing.
Well, I think based on the parliamentary system of governance, the number of seats determines which party forms the majority. And for me, that is the essence of democracy. The MP for Mina, who stood as an independent candidate and won, has solemnly pledged to join New Patriotic Party as far as Parliament is concerned. So now adding his seat to that of ours pushes to 138 seats, which means we form the majority party. And for me, I'm happy, because we are going to determine the leadership of the House and also to get selected chairman for the respective committees. Your colleague thinks you lost the majority going into the next parliament, and that you're using the security operatives, you're using machinations, you call it. You're trying to use the security agencies to grab some of the seats, including the Senate one, which he admits that now the NDC is actually holding. And he makes the point that it's a sign of other things to come, and that it's likely other seats like Techiman South will fall to the NDC as well. Well, I beg to differ from his views, because Techiman South has already been declared by the Electoral Commission, so we've gone past that stage. What we're anticipating is to get the swearing in of the president-elect, and also get members being sworn into office on the 7th of January. So we are focused. But at the end of the day, we are not perturbed. What is important here is that we form the majority. And as I said, that we are going to determine who should sit in as the Speaker of Parliament come 8th Parliament.
The NPP does not have a majority in Parliament. When we come to the House, if our colleague, the former MP, decides to be NPP, he will have to resign and a by-election held. However, in the process of voting, he can decide to vote with NPP. So let's make it clear. NPP does not have majority in Parliament.
Okay, so the offering of some clarity there, reactions from some members of Parliament. Joseph Opoku-Gakpo, our parliamentary correspondent, is still live with us. So, Joseph, I was asking you, now these are reactions we've got from after the declaration, but what was the mood like in Parliament as, the collation was actually happening in Sene West? Well, a bit of a struggle there still. This is also interesting, but, technology deciding to give us a hard time. So some of the other matters we're going to be delving into, there's also that creative arts bill that we have to delve into, the Creative Arts Agency to be formed from next year. And the sector minister, Barbara Ting JC, hoping that that will lead to, more funding in the industry, more development to ramp it up when it comes to tourism, or the creative arts, I should say, in the country. So that's something else we're going to be delving into. Anti-money laundering, we're also going to be delving into that, especially with our rating currently. It's a slippery slope we find ourselves on, and there's a lot more that we have to do in that respect. So, Joseph, let's settle for the phone lines to actually wrap up on this conversation. Now, so I'm going to repeat that question. Sene West, as the collation was going on, the counting, what was the mood like in Parliament, and what were the parliamentarians discoursing on? What were they saying?
As you saw the two MPs tell me as we had that very quick conversation just around the time that the results were coming in.
Right.
For those on the majority, it was going to be an add-on if they had won, because they are clear in their minds that they already had 137. They have also, made the point that the former MP has publicly said he would sit with them. So then it gives them the upper hand compared to the minority. So they were counting on the Sene West seat more like as an add-on to what they had already had, which they are insisting is the majority. So they admit that the NPP as a party does not have a majority in the House, but when you read the standing orders of the House, it refers to the creation of a majority, which could be a constitution of either a single party with more than enough seats in Parliament when it comes to more than half of all the total MPs, or political party, as in more than one political party, or maybe two of them, joining forces to then create the majority. And then in that sense, then that's where possibly the bit about an independent comes in, that an independent can join force with a political party, or independents can decide to join force with a political party and then end up creating the majority, which the NPP has been insisting they already had, even before we had the Senate by-election unfolding. But for those on the minority side, currently, as in the NDC, they are also insisting that they already have the majority as well, by virtue of the fact that they were insisting that even as at the time that they had 136, they claiming the Techiman South and they claiming the Sene West seat as well, which eventually the Sene West one went to them. So depending on which side of the House you are speaking to, everyone is claiming victory as far as what has happened in Senate is concerned. But it's categorical that right now, statistically, none of the two parties actually has a majority in the House.
Right.
137, and it's the independent who is now deciding to join the NPP, which gives them the upper hand and makes it possible for that side of the House to actually form the majority going into the 8th Parliament.
Now, Joseph, I mean, I've been out there this week. I've interacted with, Ghanaians on this very subject, and it appears, the country, in a way, is on a knife's edge when it comes to Parliament and how it's going to work in the next 4 years, how the executive arm of government is going to collaborate with, the legislative arm of government. A lot of people talking, lay people on the streets. Now, has this tension that I was met with on the streets, that feeling of, things not being like normal, has that tension seeped into Parliament? I mean, between the two sides, the NDC and the MPP?
So that's a conversation that when you meet MPs on the corridors, when sitting is not happening in the House and the MPs are on the floor, when you meet MPs in their offices, when they gather at the coffee shop having coffee, that's just the conversation that's happening as to how the next Parliament will go ahead and operate in the light of the split figures between the NDC and the NPP. What we're seeing is a situation where now, particularly for the majority side currently as in the NPP, it's a lot more difficult for them because you're going to have a situation where, the Constitution requires that when it comes to appointment of ministers, more than half of all ministers should actually come from Parliament as well. So then there is the issue of you end up having to drag a lot of people who are ministers, who are MPs currently, and give them additional responsibility as ministers. That would mean, of course, they need to do travel because then governing a nation is not just about sitting in your country and getting things done. They would have to do international travel. They need to visit other countries. They need to go for international conferences. They need to get work done in their offices as ministers as well. So if we have the current situation where there are more than 120 ministers that we have in the country, meaning if the president decides to repeat that same figure, he needs to have at least 60 of them, being picked from Parliament to serve in the executive, which would take their time off. So then a lot of questions and suggestions are coming up. What should be done? Is it about time the Constitution gets amended so that then the president hands are free to appoint ministers from outside Parliament, as many as he wants from outside Parliament? Is there, and by the way, that's an entrenched clause in the Constitution. So it has to go through a process in Parliament where more than 2/3 of MPs will approve and eventually go for a referendum before the president will be able to do that. Is it about time that Parliament looked again at its sitting so that then a window can be created like it happens in the UK, for example, where there can be the assumption that ministers work in the morning and Parliament can begin sitting from, let's say, 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which would also require an alteration of the standing orders in Parliament. That's also one of the suggestions that's been thrown out when you speak to MPs on the corridors. So it appears to be a very dicey situation, and this will be a Parliament like we've never had. But, even among the MPs, one of the key suggestions is that as much as possible, if the president can, he should limit how many people he will appoint from Parliament as ministers so that then they can concentrate on the work that they need. Otherwise, the NDC side will end up eventually, bullying the government going into the next Parliament because a lot of those who are ministers may not be around most of the time in order to get the work done.
Right, and those difficulties you speak of, only time will tell whether they will stymie the work of Parliament in any way. Some have suggested that with the numbers, like we know them, 137 apiece for the NDC and the MPP, at least for now, and that independent candidate from Fomena who has decided to side with the NPP. When it comes to a lot of decisions, there might be some, incidents to deal with. But by and large, Joseph, you've spent quite a while in Parliament and listening to the likes of Evans Agri-Darko, a former lecturer of mine, by the way. This will not affect the work of Parliament, will it? Until those very crucial decisions where maybe 2/3 of Parliament is needed, those entrenched clauses and the rest. By and large, this should not affect the work of Parliament, or should it?
A lot would depend on the push of the NDC going into the Parliament. If the NDC decides that they would want to make the administration of the country difficult for government, they will be able to do that. So, for example, Parliament needs, 1/3 in order to form a quorum a lot of the decisions that get taken in the House, although you need 1/3 of MPs in order to form a quorum, it says there should be at least 2/3 of all MPs on the floor at the time that the decision is being taken. And then it then goes on to say when there are at least 2/3, when some of those major decisions are being taken, then it says a simple majority is what is required in order for the decisions to be taken. So the NDC side, for example, can impede decisions taken in the House sometimes by just boycotting sitting and not showing up, so that then you don't have more than the 2/3 in order for the decision to be taken. Although if they are present, then the decision when taken will just require a simple majority. But that point is actually accurate, that most of the time, more than 90% of the time, decisions in the House actually get taken based on consensus. It's when it comes to the controversial issues that it goes to the point that the minority disagrees, and then there is a division, and then there is head count. But just assume that the NDC decides that they would want to make administration difficult for this government. And so every single decision that needs to be taken, although they have 137, the other side has 137, the independent MP chooses to sit with them, they would want to take every decision through a vote count, which would mean that even very simple decisions like procedural motions about whether a motion should be admitted, breaks need to be pulled for the head count to be done, for a voting process to be done, which may end up taking like 3 or 4 hours in order to be done. So
okay.
in a day, for example, the House could take specific decisions on like 15, 20 issues,
okay,
including procedural motions and all. If the NDC decides that they would want all of that to go through a vote, virtually everything would come to a halt to a certain extent in Parliament. So yes, I think a lot of that will depend on the posture of the NDC. And the posture of the NDC will largely be influenced by the decision that the NPP side will take in terms of their willingness to consult them and get into consensus with them on key things, like electing who the next speaker will be.
Right.
The NPP, with their independence, can decide to use their numbers to then get through who the next speaker will be.
Okay.
But if it's without the adequate consultation of the minority, they may get upset and decide to make administration difficult for the NPP going forward, which will then be very difficult. The other thing, just to chip this in very quickly.
Okay, so let's wrap up on that final point you're making.
Sure. There's an effort ongoing to review the standing orders of Parliament. And that would also play very much into how the next administration will look like. Because the new standing orders virtually simplifies a lot of things and give a lot of power to whoever controls the executive arm of government, and not exactly based on the numbers in Parliament. If that standing orders get approved in the next few days before the Parliament kicks in, the administration may be a lot more easier for the NPP.
It gets more and more interesting. Right before we delve into the Creative Arts Bill and the Anti-Money Laundering Bill, both of them now becoming a law, so to speak, let me just quickly find out, on that very last point you were making with regard to some concessions to be made, a softer stance to placate the other side, whichever of the sides is going to be in the minority. Now, some of what we've heard suggests that in some circles, maybe His Excellency the President might consider giving some ministerial positions or some other positions to members of Parliament from the other side. Of course, this not, official. Have you heard any such? Has there been any whiff of such information that you've heard?
Well, it's one of the points that, for example, have come up in my private conversations with folks on the NDC side, some of them, and there's an outright suggestion of it, that at least as far as the MPs that I've had the opportunity to interact with and ask questions about whether if the president decides to offer ministerial positions to NDC MPs, will they be willing to form a unity government of a sort? The reaction I'm getting is no, because then they are convinced they won and it's a stolen verdict in terms of what we've seen. So they would not concede by then sitting in government with a president who they claim has actually stolen John Mohammed's victory from them. I'm hearing an outright suggestion from the side of the NDC, even if the president actually decides to do that going forward.
Right. So that bit is clear. Now, let's talk about the Creative Arts Bill. And it means quite a lot. The Sector Minister, Barbara JC, talking about the fact that it will help create the Creative Arts Agency and also get quite some money into that sector. What else should we know about this bill that has been passed into law? What are going to be the benefits, so to speak, Joseph?
So one key benefit will be the setting up of the Creative Arts Fund, which will be a fund that government will sink money into, as well as contributions from other sources as well, to help with the development of the creative arts sector. So the agency will be established with the chief executive officer to then manage the sector. There will be a situation where those who are involved in the creative arts space will have to register so they are recognized in order to be able to benefit from the necessary support that's coming. You know, this was a key political pledge by the NPP ahead of the 2016 election that they were actually going to get this done. There's been a lot of back and forth. At a point in time when the bill was in Parliament, the creative arts folks were in Parliament because they had suggestions of changes that should be done. Eventually, that was settled and we've seen it being passed. And so the minister is convinced it will accelerate the development of that particular sector, and to a very large extent, interacting with some of the industry folks who came around to Parliament about 6 weeks ago to push for some changes to the bill. Well, it looks like they are also convinced it would help accelerate the development of the sector, particularly with the creation of the Creative Arts Fund and additionally an agency to better manage the sector.
Right. Now, just to wrap up, very pertinent matter there, anti-money laundering. Finally, that bill being passed into law to stiffen, to tighten, anti-money laundering regulations in our country. What is there to know? What are the highlights? What is the major difference between what we had in 2007, 2008 and what we have now, Joe?
So, for example, the Financial Intelligence Center, which is a center that's affiliated to the Bank of Ghana, that does the monitoring of various accounts and ensuring that monies that are going through the financial system are actually clean monies and all. Now, that center is being decoupled from the Bank of Ghana to become a corporate body on its own, with its own board of directors, with its own chief executive. It would have enhanced powers to be able to request for information on its own from various financial institutions and government agencies and private agencies. They would have the authority to be able to confiscate monies that they suspect to have been accrued through illegal means, even as it begins investigation. And essentially, this new bill strengthens the Financial Intelligence Center as an independent body to be able to better monitor the sector. That is one key thing. You know that recently, Ghana went on an European Union blacklist when it comes to financing of anti-terrorism and also engaging in money laundering activities. For example, the chairman of the Finance Committee, Dr. Makasibeyabwa, is asking that the European Union takes note of this key thing that the Parliament of Ghana has done and begin the processes to get Ghana off that blacklist that Ghana got on a few months ago, which makes financial transactions using Ghana more difficult, and even led to the situation where in Ghana, our embassy had to close their account somewhere in Europe and all. So that's one of the key things that everyone is hoping will change going forward and help Ghana get off some of those lists and create more transparency in the financial sector going forward. Yes.
And 2009, 2016, all of those, and now this year as well. Well, thank you very much, Joseph Opoku Gakpo, for joining us on, what exactly has been happening in Parliament in the course of this week. Very insightful conversations right there. But coming up next on your favorite morning show on television, it is Cardi coming your way with Showbiz. That is up next. Do stay.